Here it is. So, hi, and thanks for joining us tonight. This is a presentation on hurricane preparedness for small-scale farmers. It is being brought to you by Market Umbrella, but also by Sprout NOLA and a featured panel of insurance experts and pros. This is part of some work that Market Umbrella has been doing over the course of the spring to offer technical assistance to producers, in particular to small scale farmers, as part of a beginning farmer and rancher development training program partnership with the LSU Ag Center and Sprout and some other folks. Market Umbrella is the nonprofit in New Orleans that runs the Crescent City Farmers Markets since 1995. We also host a number of nutrition incentive programs and offer this kind of technical assistance for our producer network and beyond. Are soon embarking on running statewide nutrition incentive programs and other food system work on both the consumer and producer side. And then I wanted to hand it off to Sprout NOLA for introductions there as well.
Oh. Terrence, you want to go first?
Hi everyone, my name is Terrence Jackson. I'm the Farm Outreach Coordinator at Sprout NOLA. And I'll be talking about the tunnel house hurricane preparedness.
Awesome. And hey everyone, I'm Marguerite Green, or Margee Green, as many of you know me by. And I am super excited to talk to you guys about some possibilities of what we could do in terms of hurricane preparedness with communication technology in the future, as well as some best practices that we've learned from Farm Tek. Really, I'm personally very interested in the insurance panel, so cannot wait for us to be able to do that. And I've got a lot of other USDA resources that I'm excited to share with y'all, but mostly just here to help us get stronger as a community and really have these resources at the ready for this storm season, which we already know is going to be a beast. And so I think the earlier and the more we talk about how to support each other, the better off we'll be. So really grateful to CCFM, Market Umbrella for having this idea and for all of these resources that have been really pulled together by our whole community last storm season and going into this one.
Yep. So we are recording this today so that people can come to it as they're ready to start with their own hurricane prep. But like Margee said, today we're going to talk about hurricane prep best practices. We will have a panel discussion on different insurance opportunities for crop, farm, and greenhouse. And then wrap it up with a little communication technology conversation about, staying connected before, during, and after a storm, which, became a huge issue for us last year. So without further ado, kind of the impetus of this this whole webinar was came about in the recovery work that we did, that Market Umbrella did post Ida during that time. And as you can see in the map in the prior slide, our vendor network was dramatically impacted by Hurricane Ida. We did fundraising, actually had our single best fundraising campaign in our organization's 26-year history to raise resources to redirect to our producers for recovery. And part of the process was in disseminating those funds was doing site visits to our producers. And so we're talking to farmers within our network. Right now we have about 73 producers. And I'm trying to remember the numbers. I think Crescent Fund applications were 56 of them. So the vast majority of our vendor network applied for these funds. Anyhow, we talked to a lot of people about a lot of things, things that they felt like they did well, things that they wish they had done, things that they'd never do again. And so we started circulating a survey, and I just wanted to kind of share out from the network the best practices that were reported by the people that were implementing them. Of course, there were a lot of really basic things. I didn't really want to go over that so much, in terms of like, have yourself an evacuation plan and determine your own threshold, like safety threshold for when you would leave versus stay, that kind of stuff. I mean, you should all do all of that and stockpile, all of the whatever 5 days of water and food and all the things that they say. But these practices, I think, are slightly more particular to farm operations. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about them. Generator prep, I guess that is kind of more general one, but it came up in almost everybody's list. So generator prep includes, shopping for, if you don't have one, shopping for and purchasing one that's appropriate for your needs. Having it kind of staged and ready to use in a safe place, but not set up to use or plugged in and all of that. And having, of course, enough fuel to operate it. I think one key thing that we saw a lot of people run into was not having the generator support that they needed, and then being faced with really exorbitant prices for hard to get equipment after the storm, which made it really hard for people to bring their businesses back up into operation. So, I know it's hard now thinking about it, especially when it still feels kind of like recovery from Ida, but just a really important thing to prepare for. Another great thing that I saw some people do that really save tons of headache on afterwards and recovery and dealing with insurance and all that was to take pictures. So I know Terrence will talk a little bit more about this. I think, even just in your personal lives, taking pictures of things that you have that you could lose is really important. But for farms in particular, we saw people have a much shorter turnaround on insurance claims and a lot easier time dealing with FEMA when they had pictures of their structures, of inventory, of crops that they had in the ground. When you have a comprehensive list of, photographic evidence of your holdings, that I think was something that folks reported was super useful, and in the aftermath, something that we definitely saw was assistive for people. There was a lot of conversation that we saw about hoop houses, and Terrence will get into this, but I did just want to mention that from our vendor network, it was one of the top items on their list that and this is sort of a tricky one too, because we have sort of how do I want to put it, like a hurricane fatigue, right? Last year, it was like the year before when we had like 8 or 9 named storms. Like, getting yourself ready to deal with each of those potential threats as you need to can be exhausting over the course of the season. So like, how many times do you want to remove your greenhouse plastic, and how many times are you going to do your the full preparation? But this was really essential, I think, for folks who were able to save structures, and for people who lost structures, definitely something that they do differently in the future. So really taking the time to prepare those buildings. And then finally, this was not reported by our producers, but one that I wanted to throw in, because one thing that we saw, and again, just referring to that map of Ida, like plowing through our vendor network, was a lot of people strongly impacted by the storm, but not able to take advantage of USDA recovery, storm recovery opportunities, because they did not have registered farm numbers or pre-existing relationships with their farm service agency. So for things like crop insurance and storm recovery, those kinds of pre-existing relationships are essential. I mean, they're also ways that you'll get other agricultural support information. And so I just can't encourage people enough to make those contacts with your local FSA offices now, to set yourself up for eligibility for post-storm recovery resources. So that is all from the CCFM network, and I'm going to pass it back to Sprout.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about tunnel houses and how to prepare your tunnel house for storms. Down here in New Orleans, it's so many different styles of tunnel houses and ways people go and build these tunnel houses, and so many different kits that you can get these tunnel houses in. But many of them you have to prepare differently. You know, you have your caterpillar tunnel houses, which are much smaller, much lower tunnel houses, but they only have string that's tying them down. You know, you have these wiregrass tunnel houses in the picture, which is a tunnel house created by a professor named Dr. Khan in Alabama. This is a totally wooden tunnel house. So with this one, as you see at the top, they have a big open door. This is the one of the older models. So one of these, it'll be hard to go in and like take off the plastic and do all of those things. So you have to go about preparing your tunnel house many different ways, especially for these many different storms that we're having. So here's a few tips to prepare for the storms and how to try to cause minimum damage to your tunnel houses. So the first one is check for loose objects. Anything that you feel like is super loose or just hanging around the tunnel houses can be easily thrown around with the wind. Please get those objects and make sure you secure those objects in a secure place where you don't think they'll be able to get out or cause any more damage. The next one is inspect all of your trees for branches, for weak branches, loose branches. I would say typically do this in the fall or winter when all of the leaves are gone after, you know, the hurricane season is over. You can see all the broken and loose and weak branches. Make sure you properly discard those once you cut those down, because you just don't want to leave anything in a pile or anything like that that can potentially come in and blow and poke your plastic and or anything. Maybe it's not a really bad storm, but it still can blow around and cause major damage to your tunnel house. The next one is to secure all vents and doors. This is one of the major ones because a lot of the times we forget about the vents in the tunnel houses, which cause a lot of the air to get in, which causes the destruction of the tunnel houses. So when you go in there, make sure that when you're shutting off these doors and these vents, make sure that you actually like put something heavy in front of the door to make sure if wind comes through, it doesn't fly it open. Or you can tack small screws in the corners of the doors to make sure that it stay closed. Also, you can tape the ventilations and shut, so you can make sure that you can keep as much air out as possible. This is typically, I would say, do this to all the walls of the two walls of the tunnel houses where the doors are, because if the wind really starts to blow and push that door open, that'll really start to rip that wall apart with that door just moving back and forth. So that's why it's important to put something in front of that door to make sure, even if the plastic is off, make sure you put something in front of that door so you won't cause further destruction to the structure of the tunnel house. And next thing on the list is remove the plastic and secure it. Like I said, the tunnel house, the caterpillar tunnel house, you can just pull the plastic to the sides, but just don't leave it laying on the ground, because that can come apart from those ropes and cause damage to other things out there, because that is a pretty large, heavy piece of plastic. So you want to make sure that you take that off, roll it up, make sure you take the ropes also, either tighten those or take those off and secure those also. Anything, like I said, anything that you feel that can be blown around, thrown around, or cause damage with the wind, make sure you secure it. in a gray area. The next one is remove shade cloths and tighten your ropes. For some people, they don't have plastic on their tunnel houses in the summertime because it's super hot in New Orleans or in Louisiana. So they usually put shade cloths on top. But those could easily be blown off also. So if you choose to keep shade cloths on, I would just say tighten the ropes up on your tunnel houses, super tight actually, because once that wind comes, it's going to loosen up a bit. So tighten it up and maybe add some extra rope to make sure it's secure. If not, just take it down and make sure you properly store those. The next thing is check your structure. This is one of the main things you should do every season, regardless. If you're growing, you should always just make sure the tunnel house is in good condition. The smallest screw or the smallest thing structurally wrong with the tunnel house can cause major damage in a storm. So you just want to make sure that each season that you're going in production, or you just making sure that when it's time for production, the tunnel house is in the best structural condition that it can be in. The next thing is fill, there's supposed to be 5-gallon buckets of water. A lot of people didn't have water during the hurricane. So you make sure that you can keep a little bit of water on you for your plants and things that you need. So 5-gallon buckets are a great way to hold that water. Also filling up your tubs and your sinks and stuff like that to help you store water. You can also designate certain areas for specifically that water for, your plants. One of the best things I would say that could save time and help a lot of families after the storm is harvest crops that might be damaged in a storm. So if you have things like tomatoes, watermelon, squash that that can't take a lot of rain, take those things, harvest those, and if you can, find a way to store those things until the storm is over. If you can't, then they'll be great for helping another family in a time of need. I always look at farmers as the same way as I look at doctors. No matter when somebody's in need, they're always there to give people food, even if they don't have the money. So we always have, I just have the highest regard and respect for farmers for that. And the last but not least, take pictures. Take pictures, document inventory, make sure you have all of that information with all the rest of your birth certificate. All of that stuff is just as important, because you don't want to be in a situation where how many tools that you had in your shed, but a storm came and you've been gone a couple of days. Maybe somebody came and got a couple of things. You can't prove that you had that in your shed, or you can't prove how the tunnel house looked before. So I would definitely say take a whole lot of pictures throughout the season. Make sure you keep your receipts. Make sure you, like I said, keep all of these things in a safe place. The last thing you want to do is be running around, scrambling, trying to get things together at the last minute. Many would say at the 11th hour when a storm is brewing. So these are a couple of things that I would say keep in mind. The ag community in New Orleans is well connected. So making sure that you connect with farmers and organizations to help you and assist you with things like this. So if you need harvest, if you have crops that you harvest and you like to give them away, or you have somewhere to store them, you have many organizations in New Orleans that can probably help you with those things. So definitely reach out, definitely stay connected. And thank you.
Margee, did you have some? Oh, she is not here.
No, I am.
Oh, there you
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry.
Transparent.
I'm not here. Sorry.
Transparent facilitation moment. Angelina, are we doing insurance panel after the thing I'm about to share?
Yeah.
Awesome. I just wanted to check in because I know that all of our guests are here and I want to, yeah, perfect. Thank you for
Oh, yeah.
reminding me of our agenda. Awesome. So amazing tips. Thank you, Terrence. I want to call out one thing, which is when you were saying you can go ahead and harvest, those things and try to find a place to have them. We have a resource for that. So we'll talk a little bit later about all of the kind of communication and networking and what is available in our community. But I just want to put a pin right there and say that Sprout has a community cooler that is explicitly for farmers to use, day to day to try to offset that cooling cost. But really the impetus for us getting that was the disaster that was COVID-19, and then obviously later Ida and whatever comes next. So we're actually also pretty deep in the process of getting that cooler on consistent solar power. So in the exception of a direct hit, that cooler is something that'll be available to any producer until we're up to our gills. And that's part of what we want to make sure we have a communication system around for how do people understand whether or not there's a spot for them in that cooler, and how do we help people share cooler space among our community when a storm is maybe the direct hit is moving. How do we share our resources? But really quickly, what I want to bring up right now is that we did reach out to NOAA at Farm Tek. So a lot of the hoop houses that we have in this community, because of EQIP programs, have been purchased through Farm Tek. The one that I have, the greenhouse that I have, is purchased through Farm Tek. They've been really good at customer service, and I know a lot of people use them. So we reached out to Farm Tek, and they were going to be able to join us in the June 1st, or our earlier iteration of this panel, but unfortunately they couldn't make the rescheduled one. So I asked the questions that producers have asked us about hoop houses. So some of this is a reiteration of what Terrence just said, but from the horse's mouth, the guy that sells our hoop houses, I wanted to share the Farm Tek answers to those questions. So the questions that we got from producers were, number one, at what wind speed should farmers remove their plastic? So really looking for a number to help with that decision-making process. And what we heard from Farm Tek is that it's really difficult to give a specific wind speed because it has to do with direction as well as speed. So in any level of a tropical storm, it's better to be safe than sorry. As you all know, having gone through a storm, and some of us with greenhouses and hoop houses, when wind catches inside of a structure, it can be really, really devastating. So it's not just like, am I going to get a hole in the structure? Is that structure going to be able to stand? Will it catching its actual demise? So then we also heard the question of, if there's not time to remove the plastic due to rapid storm intensification, love that vocabulary, that horrifying new vocabulary. What are the alternatives for protecting the structure? The answer was, if there's no time to remove plastic in preparation for a storm, depending on level of severity, it may be wise to cut film to prevent damage to the frame. It's much more cost effective to replace film versus your steel frame. The third question that we brought to them was, is cutting holes in the face of a fast and severe storm a reasonable way to protect your structure? And their answer was, potentially, if there's not time to properly remove film in the face of emergency. So I like that was circular. The next question was, what do you want to share with growers who face a lot of storms? Is there a best practice that you want to bring to our community? And they said, growers who are in areas that face a lot of storms should always be prepared. Measures can be taken when installing the structure to increase stability of the frame, whether that's cementing in-ground posts, adding rafter supports, or additional anchoring. And as a person who's done the install of a couple different kinds of greenhouses, I also want to say one of the things that they're referring to there is that if you are getting a greenhouse that is being constructed within a city's limits, then you technically, doesn't mean you're doing this, but you do technically need to go to plan review for that and bring a blueprint. When you bring that blueprint, it will tell you what that greenhouse is wind rated to. You can often get an upgrade on those blueprints and get them wind rated to a higher level And oftentimes when you request your blueprints, if you're buying a greenhouse, it'll have that wind rating on it, and it actually won't be up to spec for being built in city limits. So it's a nice thing to know. It's definitely a headache. It's one of those things where when you're building a greenhouse in March, you're like, ugh, why do I have to do this? And then when you're battening down the hatches in July and August, you're like, oh, well, I do know that my greenhouse is wind rated to XYZ. And also we've got these insurance agents on here, and they know, if you're insuring a structure and you can prove what it's wind rated to, that's really helpful in, or I think y'all will tell me if I'm wrong, that's helpful in the insuring process. And it's also helpful in like doing your due diligence for when and if you have damage. So that's what we wanted to share from Farm Tek. And I'll kick it back to you, Angelina, for our insurance panel.
All right. Nope, too far. Here we go. Okay, I would like to, at this point, have a discussion about insurance options, and we have some insurance pros here in the room with us. I know when we were doing our farm visits, and just in general, because our markets do require, I mean, not like a storm insurance, but we do require for our vendors to have a liability insurance policy. So insurance is something that Market Umbrella has been dabbling in for a while, but definitely came up over and over again in the course of Ida recovery. And so we just wanted to bring some folks here to explain some of the different options for people who, I don't know, insurance like one of the hardest things to shop for. And so we're bringing you all the folks to answer all the questions here. I know some people will be viewing this as a recording later on, but we're happy to help facilitate connections if you want to reach out to me to talk further with any of these people. So anyhow, I'm gonna pass it on for introductions, and if you guys could tell us, who you are, how you're related to insurance, and what kind of insurance options our producers can find with you. I think that sounds like a good prompt. I mean, throw in whatever else you feel like is relevant. And I'm just gonna go in the list that I randomly typed your names in on this slide. So Brandon.
Okay, hey, this is Brandon Faust. I'm with Faust Farms, so I'm actually a vendor at the Crescent City markets and also do insurance part-time. And I guess it's kind of interesting looking at it from both perspectives, because a couple years ago, we didn't have insurance on the farm, and a bad storm came through and it blew a roof off the barn, and we didn't have any coverage for that. So when I started doing insurance, we're an independent agency, so we have a couple of different commercial insurance companies that we can go to and tell them your farm situation or how your business is structured uniquely, and they'll give us a couple different options for you as far as covering things like your property, as far as like equipment, tractors, barns, even like things you use for like grading produce and things like that. And what we also did was we got a spoilage endorsement, because we were finding out during these hurricanes and stuff, we didn't have generators, or a lot of people don't have generators, or they can't afford generators to power a whole barn, or if you have a cooler or anything like that. So we really found that maybe finding like a food spoilage option for farmers would really help them out, because there's been several times when we've lost power for 3-4 days. And I mean, we have a cooler full of produce, and we have no coverage for it. So now there's actually insurance options out there for that. And then even things for like loss of income. And a lot of times a minor storm won't really impact even us on that. But for Ida, it impacted a ton of people. And the thing about insurance is you never know you're going to need it until you need it. So as an independent agency, that's a couple of the things that we can help farmers find, depending on how big or small they are, at least to get proper coverage on their barn, or even if they have machinery or tractors, or even food spoilage. Now, the one thing I found in my field that was really hard and I couldn't even do it was insuring like greenhouses, because we have hydroponic greenhouses. And I found like Farm Bureau was excellent and they really helped us out when it came to that. And they were wonderful at insuring like actual greenhouses and structures, because I guess the risk is so high on a greenhouse and it's not built like a home. So if a bad storm comes through, the risk of losing the greenhouse is a lot higher than home. So a lot of companies don't do it, but thankfully Farm Bureau actually does do it. So that's really all I have. I don't know if anybody has any other questions.
Maybe that's a good transition to Farm Bureau.
Sure.
I know this is like a housekeeping thing I should have mentioned earlier. We did save some time at the end for questions, but I think we also kind of talked about it in advance. Like if people have questions as we, as they come up to just kind of inform this conversation, please feel free to ask those too. But I'll pass it's not a mic exactly. Pass it over to Mike.
Hey, how you doing? My name's Mike Odin. I'm a Farm Bureau agent in St. Tammany Parish, and multi-line agent. We sell auto, home, life, but we do focus on doing farm insurance, and we do a lot of the liability side, and we do cover a lot of the structures on the property specifically based for farmers. So if you have a barn, if you have a greenhouse, if you have any type of like a chicken coop, those are kinds of things that we can do. We can do in the marine policies that we can cover anything from a chicken washer to a combine tractor. Um, Farm Bureau is kind of in the market in Louisiana for these large scale farms, and when we look at these urban farmers, I always joke whenever I insure one of these guys that they call them, we call them play farmers, but they're not, because they're taking over a big part of the market. So we've kind of shifted some of our focus to being able to help them as much as we can through the products that we offer. Um, and when the policy comes up and the things like that come up, it's knowing what's covered and knowing who to contact about your coverage. And one of the key things with insurance, no matter who your insurance is with, whether it be a Farm Bureau agent, whether it's a State Farm agent, whether it's Brandon doing it as an independent, you want to have a contact person and you want to review your policies with them. That can save you so much time in the event of a storm, in the event of a hurricane. I have about 20 small farmers insured, and they all have my cell phone number, not because I'm going to give them any more attention than a normal client, but because they're going to be working from sun up to sundown. They may need to get me with a question afterwards. And I'm not touting my own horn or patting my own back. It's just I found that being able to be reached by them is different because they need different timing. So when you do things like that, it's making sure that the person that insures you knows exactly kind of what you're doing. So the specifics of what you insure and the specifics of what your property is going to look like allows the insurance professional to make sure that that is covered the correct way. And one of I always use this one as an example. No insurance company likes horses. Brandon, you know this as well as anybody. If I called you up and asked you if I can get an equine liability policy, you're going to call me and tell me not a chance. But if you have specific farming operations that are other than those horses, but you have 4 or 5 horses on the property, you can be covered. But if your insurance professional doesn't know that, they don't know how to place you in a certain specific arena, and they don't know where to put your product. So you have to be open and honest with them and let them know, look, we're going to be row crops. We're going to grow. We're going to have honey. We're going to have bees. We're going to have all this stuff. What are we trying to do? Well, I want to have a blueberry farm. That's a you pick it. Okay, well, come on, we can do that. But this is how it has to be covered. And knowing that the premium that they give you and the coverage that they give you is going to cover what you need, because that's the most important thing for farmers. You guys work too hard. You guys have too much going on to have to deal with at the end of the day, knowing that something's not covered, whether it be the liability aspect or whether it be your hoop house or whether it be a tractor gets stolen. Those kinds of things happen, especially on the urban side of things, because you guys don't have as much room to have these outbuildings and have things like that. So to make sure that you're protected and covered the right way, so that if something does happen and something does come up, how you can deal with it and who do you talk to. And to be honest with you, I'm a city boy. I grew up in New Orleans. I went to school in Metairie and moved to St. Tammany Parish and started working for Farm Bureau, and got a phone call one day from a couple of folks that said they wanted me to insure their farm. And I was like, that sounds great. And then I went to my underwriters and they were like, no, we can't do any of that. And I was like, oh, wait, we need to figure out what we can do. So I dove into it to figure out what we can and can't cover. And that's the type of person that you're looking for. Whoever your insurance personal is needs to be on the same page with you from a small business standpoint, because you know and they know that this is where I see my business, this is where I want it to be, and this is where the growth is going to come into play. That didn't answer any of your questions about who I am. Sorry.
That, that gets to the essence of that's what I was trying to ask the question to
Gotcha.
get that answer.
Gotcha.
Excellent. Are there any questions immediately following that, or? All right, let's move on to Brian then. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Again, my name is Brian Boardley. I work with Larice Insurance Agency. We're an independent agency out of Lockport, Louisiana, but we have offices in Tacoma. We have offices in Metairie and in Covington. And I recently got licensed with the FDA or USDA to do farm coverage through the government's plans. And we work through a company called ProAg to do that. And we've been working with farmers to do their revenue on what they're growing, whether it be tomatoes or cucumbers, peppers, whatever. There's different classes for all of these different things. And in November, the USDA came out with what's called the micro farm program. And I was contacted by Marguerite, and she asked me to come in and talk to y'all about this. And the microfarm program is developed for small farmers that are getting revenues of under $100,000. So farmers that are selling at local farmers markets or to local vendors, as long as the revenue is under $100,000, they can write the microfarm program for the crops and the revenue that the farmers produce. Now, there are some caveats with this, and it has just started. And anytime you're dealing with the government, unfortunately, there's all kinds of rules and regulations. So they do, to be eligible for microfarm coverage, you have to be able to receive federal benefits is the first one. The second one is you have to be a U.S. citizen or a resident, and you have to have either filed a Schedule F tax form or a tax form that can be converted into a substitute Schedule F for at least 3 years. We need 3 years of taxes to present to the USDA to get into this program. This is basically on the revenue that you would earn whether you purchase from another farmer and then resell it. And if you do purchase from another farmer, then resell, it can't be more than 50% of your revenue that you're taking in through the year. The program that they've got divided, we'd need a couple other things, which one is called a whole farm revenue history report, and then a farm operations report. And then the coverage levels you choose between 50 and 85% multiplied by the approved revenue, the insured revenue amount. The insurance programs, they're going to go by your tax year too. So the tax year, whether you file on a fiscal year or how you file, that's how the insurance is going to be filed under this revenue protection program for micro farmers. As both Michael and Brandon said, you always need coverage for property. And again, greenhouses, because they're not built like a normal building, they are susceptible to wind. And you would have to have your greenhouse with some type of wind rating to try to get that property coverage. Michael with Farm Bureau, he's a captive agent, and Farm Bureau was designed for farmers. Brandon's an independent agent, so he goes out to a lot of different markets similar to what we do. And we can get coverage for things like barns and greenhouses, farm equipment, just like Michael can. So we're all kind of dealing in the same arena. The micro farm policy that the USDA has, they have other policies besides this one. They have a whole farm revenue protection plan and several other plans, but these are more designed for the larger scale farmers that are, working sometimes hundreds of acres of land and growing several different crops. This micro farm program, as I said, started in November of 2021, so it is a new program. I've got a little information on it that I've gotten from ProAg, but probably don't have as much information as everyone needs right now. But I would be happy to answer any questions or help anybody out if they're interested in working through one of these programs. It is available for all 50 states. Of course, we're probably just talking to people in Louisiana, maybe Mississippi right now, but it would be available in Louisiana. One of the problems with the micro farm program is catastrophic risk coverage, or CAT coverage, is not available for revenue under this program. We do have other programs for drought and flooding and things like that we go through that is issued through other agencies, but the USDA through their micro farm program has certain stipulations that they're working through. Does anyone have any questions on anything that I've just kind of thrown out there?
I have a question. So within our network, we have both urban and more rural producers, but really no one over like 50 acres. So like smaller scale. And often what we've seen with some of the federal programs, especially with regards to like crop insurance, is coverage for, crops that aren't being produced, or expenses related to accessing the coverage to kind of offset any benefit that a very small scale producer would receive from it. They're not programs that are geared toward smaller producers. My question, I guess, is what is the thing about this micro farm that really differentiates, what's the utility that smaller farmers are going to be able to experience from this that they don't get from other crop insurance programs?
Well, I think premiums in this are subsidized partially by the federal government. So the premiums in this micro farm program is basically designed for these small farm revenue generating outfits that are, not producing more than say 100,000 in revenue every year. So I haven't had any of these quoted yet. I haven't seen the premiums on it. I have seen the premiums on another program which deals with drought and excess rain. That program that I've quoted so far to several farmers is really exorbitant, and I haven't had anyone buy one of these yet because the cost is just astronomical and it just doesn't make any sense to do that. But I think this micro farm program is designed to keep the revenues down for the premiums. And I'm hoping that, as soon as we get, someone that's interested in it and wants to get a quote through it, that is something that these smaller farmers could go ahead and afford and purchase to cover any revenue that they may have. The closing date for this program, though, and every crop has a different closing date according to the region that you're in and what you're growing. But this particular program has a sales closing date of March 15th. So we would have to have everything in and bound before March 15th of 2023. When I got contacted on this, it was right around the same time to speak to y'all. I think I was supposed to come out to somewhere in the Bywater and talk, and that didn't happen, but I'm glad we have this opportunity to talk about this micro farm program.
Brian, I had a question. Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Oh, you go,
No,
Mike.
go ahead. Please.
No, I had a question for you. With the micro farm package that you're talking about, what does it cover? Does it cover actually any structures? Does it cover actually any liability? Does it cover, or is it just crop-based coverage and drought and stuff like that?
I believe it's just for crop-based coverage, but probably like Brandon said, and you're Michael, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, Michael. I think that this coverage is more just for the crops and the revenues that are grown. It could cover some other items on the farm, because in the whole farm revenue protection plan, I believe it does have some coverage for property, but I haven't really got to ask that question yet. I wanted to actually get in touch with ProAg today, but my day just kind of slipped by me there, and I wasn't able to find out additional information on it. But it may have some actual protection in there for some farm equipment too, but I'd have to find out. I don't know the answer to that question, Michael. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask a question, and I just wanted to point out something that y'all just said that I think that makes producers' heads spin sometimes, especially after disaster, is that generally you're going to have to get your crops insured separately, like Brian is talking about, from your structures, like Brandon and Michael are talking about. And it's just unfortunate. You might think previous to looking at insurance, it would make sense that everything that happens on site, just like if you were running a bakery and you lost your flour, you would claim that with your regular insurance for like contents, property and contents kind of thing. But that's just not how it really works with a farm, especially because crops are federally subsidized. So there's crop insurance that is a large federal system. And this is just like a complication of how smaller farmers fit into that large system. And Brian, I just wanted to point out that you just mentioned the whole farm revenue program, and that this micro farm program, as you have said, is like kind of essentially supposed to be the answer to a small farmer for that whole farm revenue, because both that and the other kind of original answer to it, which was the non-insured crop, the NAP program, those have not been able to be accessed by small farms. So I think a 2017 survey of new and beginning farmers showed that less than 5% who had tried to use whole farm revenue protection insurance through the RMA, the risk management agency of the USDA, were able to actually do that whole farm revenue. And it's that a lot of the reporting requirements for the planting and harvesting of those crops don't match the schedules of small farmers. So just wanted to name that. And then I was going to ask my question after a long-winded thing, which is that a lot of farms show on their Schedule F operating at a loss. And we know that that's actually like a pretty normal thing. Statistically, most farms in America operate at a loss on their Schedule F. And I think a lot of farms don't talk about that with each other. And so they think they're operating at a loss and nobody else is. And I think it's one of the things that makes a lot of farmers not apply for programs, because they're like, oh, then people are going to see my Schedule F. No, I'm operating at a loss. So I wanted to ask our insurance guys how that affects how your Schedule F showing a loss affects your ability to be insured, and you're dealing with farms, so I assume you have a way of interpreting those numbers outside of just if they're negative or positive numbers.
You want to take that one, Brandon?
Brandon, you want to take it?
So a lot of like the commercial policies, when I do them for a business or a farm or anything like that, you're going to look at, that's really going to put a price on the premium more than anything that I've noticed. So like, obviously the more revenue you're bringing in, the higher the premium, because the greater the risk. So I've never ran into it. It doesn't say, necessarily if there's a loss. They necessarily just want to know as far as your gross income. And then eventually they're going to do an audit on the book, possibly the next calendar year of the bank statements, especially if you're a new business, it'll be 1 year. And then they'll see then they'll determine the premium or adjust the rating of it from what you originally said to actually what the audit says. In a sense, am I explaining it kind of all right to you?
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, panelists, and hopefully you're not totally overwhelmed with inquiries from our small producers after this, or maybe you are. I mean, I would love to see people to have more resources than, I mean, I'm very glad that we were able to wrangle the Crescent Fund for Ida, but I don't want people to have to rely on philanthropy to sustain their farm businesses. So I think this is great, an important option. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You're welcome to stick around, y'all, if you want to. I think otherwise feel free to, you know, go back to your own lives. All right, where wake up? Nope, there we go. Moving on to communication technology. This is obviously a huge problem, kind of before, during, and after Ida that we ran into. Not to like go too far off onto like a tangent, but I know for our inter-office sort, like our internal preparation, we had a whole like hurricane preparedness plan that didn't really involve major storms. It only involved like what we had seen in the last 5 years. And so anyhow, I think Ida changed our perspective on a lot of these things and broadened our ideas about what the need is. And so communication and the sharing of resources and staying connected to people when we don't have cell service and we don't have, you know, the internet was a huge issue that we'd like to be better prepared for this storm season. Anyhow, I want to pass it off to Margee to talk about this a little bit more in depth.
Thanks, Angelina. Yeah, well, so we know that we have a lot of resources in our community. I want to call out like Anna Timmerman's work. Hey, Anna, last storm season with getting people together in a room post-storm, bringing our FSA, our NRCS, our RMA agents in there and talking about what was available. And we're just thinking about like those days immediately after and before a storm as well, and what could an increased effectiveness in communication systems look like. And so I think, you know, we know that currently the deal with putting on classes and webinars is that basically you're shooting in the dark. You know, if you have 80 people RSVP, well, last night we did an event that was like captured online where we had 70 people RSVP and 8 people came. We've also done events where we've had 70 people RSVP and 1 person come. So there's really no way to kind of like track attendance anymore. And I do think that sometimes by recording things, people are like, I don't need to come, it'll be recorded. But I want to create a brainstorming session in this call and then also offer some starting points for solutions for how we can better communicate before storms, during storms, after storms as an agricultural community, both about resources for recovery, but also about increasing our communication about, we've all seen like how a storm can move. And we've even had, I can think back to Ida when we had a couple of communication quandaries. So I'll use this as an example. One of the farms that was hit ended up needing to sell their flock of chickens. We have so many different needs from different kinds of producers in the state of Louisiana. We have the small farmers, we have the big farmers, we have everybody anywhere in between. When a big farmer, and when I say big, I'm still talking about like our food system. So we're talking about somebody like 50 acres or below. Yeah, so when a bigger producer, someone on the higher end of that spectrum ends up with damage, let's say a flock of chickens that they need to rehome, and they need that to be financially advantageous for them and for it to require very little time because they're going through like a disaster. How do we connect other producers who might be willing and able to purchase that flock most effectively? So we have a couple methods of communication. One of them that some of you all know is like the Greater New Orleans Growers Alliance, but we need to be able to tier out communication because connecting small scale urban farmers to a large farmer who's trying to rehome 50 chickens at the hardest moment of their life in the past couple years, ends up with a lot of people texting like, what variety are they? What color eggs are they? Can I have one? Can you bring it to me? Which is not really all that good for building community in our food system. And so we need to be able to help people understand that we're all farmers, but we all have to understand each other's needs and what impact after storms looks like. So we've been thinking about what could a communication system look like? And so I want you to take a second to think about the before, what we feel in the moments before a storm hits ourselves or our neighbors. So that's, how is your infrastructure protected? What questions do you want community to be able to answer with you in those nerve-wracking moments? Some of us have farm communities in our neighborhood, others don't. Some of our rural producers don't have anybody within, a couple miles of them that they can like bounce ideas off of. Some of our urban producers have never been through the things that our rural producers do. So what kind of community are you looking for in those nerve-wracking moments? What are the things that actually make a difference before? Is it cold storage? How would being able to communicate with cold storage systems in the city look like if we knew that the hit was maybe going to go more towards St. Tammany or Washington Parish, maybe more Southwest, and vice versa? Like, what do you need if it's a storm that's coming straight to the city of New Orleans? What kind of resources do we actually want to get out of the city in order to better support our farmers after a storm? So I did create a little jam board, and I know we don't have a ton of people here, but I'd love if we could try to get a couple things up on it. And so I divided it into technology resources and physical and material resources that we think would be helpful with a storm coming. And I'm going to add some stuff that I've heard from you all. And then also I'll ask people to come off mute and say things so that I can type them and we can capture these things on a note. So I know that's weird in a Zoom call that's like a webinar, but just go ahead and come off mute. I already saw Brandon come off. So give it to me, Brandon.
Oh.
Come on.
I like the cold storage. You mean that's like cold storage for when a storm comes for farmers to be able to store their produce?
That's right. Yeah, either in the form of a trailer that can go somewhere else or in the form of a resource within a city that can do sales and distribution of product after a storm passes.
Is there any type of like resource out there maybe to like help farmers like sell or have an outlet to fast track maybe getting rid of the produce to even just maybe so they could generate extra money to maybe even prepare for the storm?
Yeah, that's an amazing one. What I'll point to is, so we did this last time, and I think you actually were a huge participant in it, but we didn't do financial reimbursement with you. And I'd love for us to see as a community how we could build this up, is that we raised some money, like a purchasing fund for produce. And I know you all very kindly donated a lot to this fund of produce post-market, but we were doing distribution of local produce to families in need.
Yes, ma'am.
Storm. And so one of the things, like what you're saying, I think we could do is create a marketplace for that stuff. So instead of having to give it, not having to, but being so kindly willing to donate it, like how do we offset that cost for local farmers and make sure that we're feeding people, because it's when people need food the most, and it's when farmers are least capable and able to donate.
Yeah, so in my mind, like the one good thing about produce is it can stay outside, like in your household at room temperature. So it does have value and use compared to a regular, refrigerator where you're trying to put all your food in ice chests. So you can actually use this and not have it take up space. And if there was a way to maybe like market. So everybody's running to the grocery stores, buying. If there was a way to say, hey, the farmers are trying to get rid of their crops and vegetables, like go buy from them to stock up on your hurricane needs, whether it's, whatever's in season at the time, but during hurricanes, a lot of people are grilling and things like that and using gas and,
Doing like a flash sale is kind of what I'm hearing. Like if we could make it
Yeah.
easy for people to say like, okay, we're stocking up. What are the things that we can actually have in our, right? So like maybe they're not buying like spinach, right? But maybe they're buying like summer squash because you can still grill that. They're buying tomatoes because you can slice those. And I think we could bring this into that conversation. Is like, we all know what it's like to be like 4 days after a storm and you haven't had AC in days and you haven't like been able to see anything in front of you after the lights go out and all you've eaten is like canned beans.
That's right.
It would be like really lovely to have produce at those times.
One of the this just kind of makes me think, because I feel like what I saw like from our network was there were some people that had some producers who had product that they immediately needed to move, but nobody was buying in the immediate aftermath of the storm. The first 2 or 3 days was really just, so at least in New Orleans, like half of the population had evacuated. And so many people who stayed, did have like 2 or 3 days worth of food. The restaurants were closed, so there was sort of the disconnect there, but that was also when nobody had like power to keep things cold. So by the time there was need again, there was also spoilage. Anyhow, one of the survey responses from our producer network was resources towards solar power for cold storage. And I think that was something that popped up too with what was Devin's thing after like the solar power for community hubs for bars and restaurants. Remember, just like a little more energy autonomy after the fact to buy us some time, because otherwise then it does become a donation where you're just trying to like not throw it away and put it to use, but it could still be revenue if
What about
it's in good shape.
what about partnering with farmers who have animals? And this is a way to get rid of product because the pigs still need to eat, the cows still need to eat, the chickens still need to eat. And no, you're not really excited about sending them all your beautiful heads of lettuce, but it's still a way to get rid of it and maybe partnering with that at a price of that if you have enough on there. And yeah, you guys keep mentioning solar power, which is great, but if the grid comes back on, that solar power gets shut off. So have y'all looked at doing like a gas powered like a natural gas generator? Like we call them whole house generators in the insurance business because it just protects and it runs off of natural gas. Because that solar generator, what it does is and I'm not an electrician, I play one on TV. When it back feeds back into the line, so they shut down the solar panels once that power is off, from my understanding. So sometimes that solar isn't even available to run what it needs to run because the battery can't charge because it's the back feed isn't allowed by Clico or Energy. So doing something like we call them whole house generators with the natural gas or something like that might be a little bit more of a resourceful use of it, and you may be able to look at like a tax break or a write-off because you're doing it for what you're doing it for.
Yeah. And I think, yes, I think that's great. And like, maybe it's just as simple as us kind of as technical service providers, bringing in some resources for folks who do those, the installation, you're jogging my brain, Mike, the installation of those generator switches, like the transformer switches, to be able to do whole home generators, which are like a $300 install done by an electrician, just right over there by your box. And those can power a lot. And then also, I think we could bring in conversations with Alliance for Affordable Energy, because one of the resources that Angelina and I connected about kind of in the wake of the storm, far enough out that there wasn't a great need anymore. But we do have some resources and connection to donors will occasionally do big grants of solar panels and power boxes, which are not tied into the grid. So it's like a 100, Sprout has one. It's like a 100-watt panel that directly plugs into like a Jackery power station.
Yes.
And so those are really nice post-storm because you can charge it during the day and bring it in during the evening. It does multiple charges on a phone. You know, it does multiple charges on a computer. It can run a fan all night, that kind of stuff. And we have occasionally seen donors kind of try to figure out what is the most impactful community to get those generators to. And I would argue that it's farmers. So I think having a both and conversation about how do we kind of build, like Angelina, you were saying, that energy autonomy of like being able to be off the grid when we need to be off the grid. And then also understanding that like there's the devil we know too, which is like the generators that we have consistently had for all the storm seasons of our lives. That really can sometimes run an HVAC, like, which is sometimes what you need. A compressor is a very hard thing to run on solar. And I know that because I am trying to get it done right now. Cool. So we've got a lot of those physical resources and I want to encourage people to keep saying them. I'm not trying to steer us away from it. I want to offer a technology resource and I really want people to give feedback on this resource because it's one that we're hopefully going to pursue, which is a text-based system for being able to communicate across different kinds of communities, both in times like of milk and honey and times of disaster that our food system could maybe collaboratively use, because a lot of these text-based platforms are really expensive. So my organization Sprout would not ever want to own something like that by ourselves. We would want to own that with our partners and have a really solid plan of how it gets used. But if there were a text-based system for farmers to be able to communicate what kinds of things would be helpful to have in that system and what kinds of things would it best serve you with? So is that being able to communicate back and forth with large groups of other farmers? Is that just getting one-way communication of information? Is that, heck no, keep me off of that, I don't need more texts? Like, what are you feeling when you hear that?
Margee, just thinking about the days after Ida and Zeta, working as an extension agent, I was asked to do the damage assessments for the USDA to get the declaration of a disaster through the Congress. And it would be super helpful if I could communicate with a group of farmers to kind of take the temperature of the losses and get some preliminary data as soon as possible to the legislature. That would be really helpful.
That's amazing. That's a really big one. Yeah, wow, like what a thing, and what a great way to get people like linked in really quick. Nobody's checking their email.
Yep.
We all have, you know, a different 25 farmers numbers.
Mhm.
Like each one of us who work in agriculture are like on speed dial with a different population of farmers. Like, how do we make sure they all are talking? Yeah. What else, you guys? What was helpful? What did you think could have been done better in terms of tech or ways that a text-based system could help?
I'll definitely offer taking drone photos and drone videos of properties, farms, especially before and after the storm. So if we have other people in the area with drones, I don't mind trying to organize with them and seeing how can we best help the farming community.
And Terrence, I'll say this while we're on camera, so it's like set forever. That can be part of that is like part of your job for sure. That is funded. That is a huge thing. I think farmers would love that. We are here to pay for your time to do that.
That's awesome.
That's a cool resource. Thanks for offering that.
Just for the text tree advocacy, definitely when farmers markets shut down, our work shifted really rapidly to first just checking in with people, and we had over 70 producers in our network. So basically, for our organization, that's like everybody gets assigned like 10 people that you're just trying to like connect with and make sure that everyone is okay. And even, in the very beginning, how do you connect people to basic, whatever, ice, gas, do you need help evacuating, like that kind of stuff. And then later, as we became connected to other, emergency grant relief things, we were using text to kind of like share out every piece of opportunity. When we got the Crescent Fund, that first round of Crescent Fund up, we're texting it out, 1,000 times, because it's not always like going through. And it's just so hard to do it that many times when you really, I don't know. It's even funny to like reflect on. We just become so dependent on our technology that like having to struggle to find ways to charge your phone to even send those kind of texts, even for staff on our organization who had evacuated, were having challenges, like in more rural areas with their connectivity, with access to power. So it's just like this pervasive issue that created like a lot of labor and concern. And so anyhow, efficient communication is so important for many reasons, but resource sharing, I think, is another big one. Oh, and you know what, I'll add just one other one, because after the fact, we learned of like 3 different producers in our network who were like out of town during the storm. And so people were really like trying to find other people that could help them prep their property beforehand.
Yep. Needing labor, like, because there are people who work on our, like, there are people who don't have their own farms and who bounce, and those people might be willing and able to do that for either pay. Somebody might say, I'm out of the eye of the storm, I got some time, I got a truck, I can go shut down your farm for you as a friend. Just kind of speaking to how messy communication can get, Angelina, I'm like thinking back about like you and I were trying to, like, I was doing work in the field and you were like trying to connect producers to me. And like, that's like the best we can do, but it's messy. I'm just remembering you were like, this one farmer is in really dire straits. And like, I misunderstood who it was. So I texted another farmer with the same name and was like, where are you at? Like, I'm coming. And they were like, I'm fine. What are you talking about? Like, I literally was like, I'm loaded up. I've got ice for you. I've got gas for you. I've got a generator for you. And he was like, chill out. Like, I'm good. But it was like you had been like, he's in bad shape. And it was just like, what if we all just had a platform and didn't embarrass Margee?
Oh, sorry.
No, you didn't do it. It was a very funny situation. I'm totally kidding.
Hey,
Hilarious.
Kind of going back to y'all's physical and material list. I know y'all are moving toward technology. Who else do y'all partner with? Like, what other organizations do you guys partner with?
Well, LSU Ag Center is representing here. We've also got in the Greater New Orleans Growers Alliance, which is like the growers network for the city of New Orleans. We have historically gotten some support like from RAFI, which is the Rural Agriculture Foundation, something like that. They've created some like grant resources. But for the most part, like that's who's local, who does disaster work. Yeah.
Have y'all looked at, so the Louisiana Small Business Development Center? Have you looked at those guys? Because farmers are first and foremost small business owners before anything else.
Yeah,
they love what they do. I would tap them. I worked for them a long time ago, but what they do is they can assist with a lot of things like SBA loans. They can assist with things like those kinds of things that the small farmer may need on the backside of the storm, where, okay, this isn't covered. How can I get that stuff taken care of? How do I run my business? What does my hurricane preparedness look like from a small business standpoint? Not just how do I get rid of these crops, you know? Do you guys look at the Better Business, not the Better Business, the Chamber of Commerce and stuff like that? Have y'all tapped with any of them?
Um,
not.
I haven't personally, GNOF for us, the Greater New Orleans Foundation was also a primary funder of the
Yep.
Crescent Fund. I like that LSBDC suggestion though. I always want to like find more opportunities to work with those guys and connect our
The Urban
you know,
League is another one.
network of
The,
small businesses. to
the Urban
everyone
League would
that's-
be another one for you guys as well. Because where y'all are at, New Orleans, the Urban League does push a lot of stuff through New Orleans. There's a ton of little nonprofits that are small business or entrepreneurial based that can help assist with the business side of farming and to help maintain what the relationships through that. And then they can kind of put if you're looking for laborers, maybe they know that they've got a group of guys over here, or they've got, hey, this company has this, that you guys can go talk to them. Like just being a connector of people almost more than anything else.
And that was Urban League.
Urban League is they're one in New Orleans that does a lot of stuff in the community.
Okay.
And if you went to them as what you guys are and said, hey, we're looking to partner with you guys on some stuff and see what they would do. But the Small Business Development Center I know would partner with you on some stuff. And if you reached out to them, because they need to have something along those lines for the business revenue.
That's a great.
Maybe
yeah.
this isn't like a technology solution, and maybe it's just more of like planning and coordination between us. But I felt like one thing that was really a pervasive experience for me, like during Ida recovery, was, like everybody was putting together their what do you call resource pages,
Guys,
the
yeah.
links to all the things. So we're all just like, okay, here's the new thing. Text it out, add it to the list, communicate it with our people. And, our people are like, a lot of them are here right now. So that, I just feel like if it's a technology that's directing people to a single place where we can all just like upload resources instead of like everybody like recreating
Yeah.
their own mostly duplicative list, that could like save a lot of time for everybody involved, the list creators and people who are looking for resources.
Yeah, like crowdsourcing a list. I think that a thing that happens, and we should just acknowledge that sometimes this is a thing that happens with nonprofits and organizations, is there is like a race to be relevant during disasters, and that sometimes supersedes like
Mhm.
what we actually need, which is group participation. Like it's like the time where people should be the least like resource guarding. And so acknowledging what you just said, is anyone aware of like a platform that's not, I'm like trying to figure out how do we balance like the wild west of like creating like a Reddit, subreddit, like what you don't want us to do. Cause like then somebody can be like, in the middle of us talking about serious hurricane resources, somebody could be like, has anyone ever tried to grow mangoes? Right. Like we don't want that. Like, but what is there like a platform that can be used that's like submission and acceptance of like public postings of resources? Because I think Angelina, like being able to have a hyperlink that things stay at every storm season too. I know for me, just yesterday, I put the nhc.noaa.gov like back at as my like constant go-to, because it's storm season again. So I want to see what storms are in the Gulf. Like if we could create a platform where stuff just lives and is updated, that stays the same from season to season and is co-owned by like individual farmers and organizations. Anybody ever heard of anything like that?
I was gonna say a Facebook group where you just constantly upload information. And they have like admins and stuff, so you can assign people roles in the group and different stuff like that. And that's about the only other thing that I can really think of.
I know a couple of people who evacuated during Ida and basically served as like evacuated triaging agents for what a lot of nonprofits were doing, and they did the IDA Support Network Instagram. So it was kind of like collating essentially what other nonprofits were doing, and also kind of like navigating like mutual aid requests as well, which I think is like, yeah, that's a hard tension to navigate in disaster response. Is like there's so much happening and it's very chaotic, so you need a mediator or a moderator, but there's like that's also a really hard role to fill in the moment. So that was kind of something that I was thinking of, like building a network where you have like basically, depending on where it hits, you have someone who is outside of where it hits who can kind of is knowledgeable enough to be able to like do some of that triaging. And if they don't have the answer, then there's 3 people on the ground or directly like in the area that they know they can get in contact with, and have some kind of like 3 people in particular, because text messages and whatnot aren't going through. The like grandest version of that idea, I think, is having a hotline. But that's like incredibly resource intensive. But the opportunity to have a farmer like call someone and be like, hey, I'm actually just freaking out right now. Can you help me walk through what I need to do right now? And have that person be like, you need to go take pictures. You need to do this. You need to calm down. Do you have water? Can I send you these things? So I think that like, and that kind of like emotional support, I think, is really important. And we lose a lot of that with the text-based stuff.
I think that's really, really smart. And I just want to note that, I think Maggie Kaiser, a farmer in our community, brought this into a lot of spaces, but she does birth work. And one of the resources that was developed among the sort of like midwife community in New Orleans and other places was an ability to volley to each other to run hotlines during disasters. So if there's a similar community of farmers or ag food system people who face disasters in another way during another season, that like people can show up for them when their disasters happen, like say it freezes, like with intensifying cold weather. And then similarly, another community can show up for you during your disaster season. So I don't know exactly how to navigate that, but it's I do think it's like a cool aspiration, and it kind of falls between like a sort of physical material and tech resource.
It's
Great.
also not necessarily, it's not necessarily an idea, but this is some like a grudge that I have, is like local resources getting sent out while external resources are getting sent in when they're sending the same things both directions. And like in particular with like disaster food response, of people being like, I need to get my vegetables sold, and they end up like being like, okay, we're kind of farther away, we'll take my stuff. And then there's other people who are bringing in admittedly larger amounts of food to serve larger amounts of people, but figuring out a way to be like, okay, what resources do we get to keep, or like how can we keep resources here without having to like also be energy efficient insofar as it's sustainable, but also insofar as everyone's bandwidth is so low.
A good partner for that piece of it specifically might be the Chef Brigade NOLA. And I would reach out to April, who's one of their coordinators. She's big in sustainability and local foods, and she knows a lot of the farmers too. That might be an option. They do bring trucks in for cold storage, and their big thing is rescuing the food out of the restaurant walk-ins and providing that to the community. So it might be a good opportunity to plug into existing infrastructure.
That's great. Well, I know, Angelina, just checking on time, like, do we want to stay here longer or do we want to transition out of this? I think, like, I both think we could keep going, and I also think it's like, cool, so let's get this done by July 25th. I just created a date and that's like bad juju, so I'm gonna knock on wood. Sorry.
Oh, am I? No, I'm not muted.
Sorry.
I am recovering from COVID. Woo, apologies, everybody. Okay, yeah, no, I think the very next slide is actually the last slide, which is just Q&A. but I feel like, um, I don't know. My impression is that we've left space along the way to answer those questions, and I feel like this might be a good place to end a recording for folks.
Yeah, do you want me to run through those additional resources really quickly? Yeah. Just so they're on that recording. Maybe I'll screen, do I want to just screen share again so that there's something fun to see on the recording? I do. Let me just, it's always so funny to share your own screen because you're just like, what will people learn about me from my browser window? And it's basically just like, oh, she really likes agriculture.
Not embarrassing. Like, oh, she does not look at her email.
Oh, she's a nerd. Yeah, exactly. She does not look at her email. I like if you've ever been the person sharing your screen and you've zoned out and forgotten you're the person sharing your screen and started answering emails. That is the ultimate embarrassing moment. And I've done it multiple times. Great. So I wanted to share a couple of resources. And I think the thing that we can admit is that a lot of these resources, and this is an okay thing to say, right? I feel open about this. A lot of these resources, especially federal resources, are traditionally for large scale farmers. Looking at this disaster assistance programs at a glance, we see 5 silos right there. And so unfortunately, a lot of these things are not adapted to our community, but there is a sort of sea change happening with American Rescue Plan funding, with an acknowledgement of the climate crisis from the USDA, and with climate smart agriculture being at the forefront of a lot of what the USDA is funding, and like the very clear pattern of rapid storm intensification. I think we can see that some of these programs, they're working to try to adapt them to smaller farmers as our type of agriculture begins to take up a larger market share, like Mr. Odin was saying, like Mike was saying. So this disaster assistance programs at a glance gives you a kind of quick rundown of, and we're going to create the first living doc of the season and share all of these with you. And then hopefully that living document becomes some part of a community-owned resource guide that we're talking about on our Jamboard. But this is like a quick pamphlet from the USDA that goes through all of their programs and what kinds of disasters they cover. We're talking about hurricanes today, but the state of Louisiana has begun, it's not new, but we are experiencing more droughts than usual. We are experiencing freezes in different areas for longer periods of time. So it's possible that in our lifetime, other of these disasters will occur too. For us, fire can always occur almost anywhere. I know that the state of Louisiana doesn't have a wildfire problem, but they do exist. Excessive moisture and flood, that is a different thing from hurricanes. So this is a good overview of all of those USDA programs by disaster type, as you can see. And then you're going to come over to the disaster program panel and it will identify what the program is. So some of these are things that you heard about in those days immediately following the storm, from some of our own organizations, from LSU, and their indemnity programs. They're also like I said, the non-insured crop disaster assistance program, which is shortened to NAP and always throws me off. That does only applies to producers that have, like Angelina said, that relationship with the FSA and a farm number. If you need assistance in getting a farm number, we are happy to help you with that. Also, Jamie Rodriguez is happy to help you with that. I hope she doesn't mind that I said she's happy to help you with that. I think she is. The next thing I'm going to show you is the RMA agent locator. This is how I found Brian back in the day. Started talking to him about small scale farm insurance about 2 years ago, and then escalated that conversation in the wake of Ida. So you can locate your insurance agency for the RMA. That is the risk management agency of the USDA. So it is a sub department of the USDA that handles risk management, which is insurance speak for insurance. the management of risk on your farm. And so you'll be able to find your federal providers through this website. You can just click here and it brings you through a process of saying where you live, what kind of crop you're trying, what kind of specialty you have, what you're trying to insure, and what your area is. So you would just type in your city right here, and I'm just typing in New Orleans because that's where I am. You could type in, Enon, Louisiana if you wanted. And then what's going to come up right there, we got Brian and we got Star, both at Laris. We've got a few other people over here in Amite. That's about a little over 50 miles away, which is was my first kind of target area. The folks over in Amite, I have not been able to get in touch with them. I'm sure if you can, they're lovely. So that's the next thing I wanted to show you. We have our living resources from last storm season. So hopefully we'll be able to compile something like this that is actually that's collaborative. This one was collaborative. Many of the organizations on the call collaborated on this one, but something that's like a little more living and flexible. We also have the disaster assistance programs listed out here, and this will also be sent out. So that's the NAP program, the same program for livestock that had death or loss after a storm. The tree assistance program, which is going to be for orchard and nursery tree producers. The ELAP program, that's going to cover your honeybees and livestock. The emergency loan program, that is of course a loan, so it does have to be repaid, but it's a low interest loan for farm producers, sometimes a better fit than an SBA loan unless there's a disaster assistance SBA loan. A lot of our farmers ended up needing to just get loans to do some of that damage repair because there were not grants or assistance. And then the emergency conservation program. And so that is for rehabbing like conservation areas and also fence loss and debris removal, but it is a highly specified program that doesn't end up being all that helpful for most of our producers, unfortunately, because that fence loss is really only applicable if you have livestock that can get out if that fence is lost, and that livestock could potentially hurt someone, is the way it's been explained to us. And that debris removal is only similarly if it's not just to help you with debris removal. There's a lot of documentation that goes into that, and you do have to show that it's damaging conservation area. So hopefully these programs get a little bit more tailored to our community soon. And then flowing through these last things, we have a disaster assistance recovery tool. That's a USDA tool that helps you figure out exactly what programs you might qualify for. So it's like, do you have loss? When did it happen? This will figure into whether or not your damage is part of like a federally declared event, which, like Anna said earlier, is helpful for you to respond with pictures so that those assessments can be sent up to the legislature, I believe.
Yeah, it goes all the way to DC.
Goes to DC, thank you. And then the type, what the impact is and where you are, and then it'll kind of spit out a list of potential programs for you. Those programs are all already iterated in the other resources I shared. This is just like a nice tool if you are like overwhelmed by the text-based products. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about really quickly is the ERP. So this is also has been known as like the WIP, the Wildfire and Hurricane Indemnity Program. And basically in 2-year cycles, Congress will usually distribute funding for qualified disasters. And that's usually in like several billion. Oh, in this one, it was only 750 million. So I think the last iteration of the WIP, which was 2017, 2018, was 2 billion. This is 750 million, but it is, they basically do a funding availability notice for people retroactively. And if no other programs serve to farm, then they can see if they qualify for this funding. So this is the ERP, and it has now been approved for 2020 and 2021. And so you should check out if this is something that applies to you. our IDA definitely qualifies. Whether or not an individual farm qualifies, you want to go through that checklist to find out. But that is kind of where we are. And I've said a couple times, these programs don't fit our farms well. And that's where that micro farm program development came from. And so, yeah, hopefully that works out.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of those resources. And I think that's a great place to leave it tonight. Thanks for everyone who participated. And again, if you're viewing this on recording, please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. I think you'll be receiving it through the Eventbrite, and so you'll be able to contact us that way. All right, thanks so much and have a good evening, and cross our fingers we don't get a big one this year.
Thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.